Welcome to this webcast hosted by Socialist Action. We acknowledge that this event takes place on the unceded territories of the Mississauga of the New Credit and the Haudenosaunee people and on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island. I am speaking to you from Jamaica, where the Taino people, the Arawak-speaking inhabitants of the Caribbean, were wiped out by slavery, disease, and starvation brought by the European powers. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporations and returning them to the commons. My name is Elizabeth Bice. I'm a retired member of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Federal Treasurer of the NDP Socialist Caucus, a leading member of Socialist Action, and your host for today. This year marks the 32nd anniversary of the founding of Socialist Action in the Canadian state. I hope you enjoy this educational event centered on an important chapter of the history of the workers' movement in North America. If you want to change the world, please get directly involved in our party. We warmly invite you to join Socialist Action. Tonight's topic is James P. Cannon, a founder of American Communism, Lessons for Today, featuring a presentation by Professor Bryan Palmer, who will speak shortly for 40 minutes. James P. Cannon was the founder and leading figure in the history of American Trotskyism for 30 years. The height of influence of this dissident communist movement was the 1930s, when organizations led by Cannon were critically important in the founding of the Fourth International in 1938. Trotskyists in Minneapolis led a series of major Teamsters strikes in 1934 that helped give rise to the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, later in the decade. Under Cannon's leadership, American Trotskyists fused with A.J. Muste's American Workers Party, which then entered the Socialist Party led by Norman Thomas. While helping to build that organization, they raised principal criticisms of its political orientation, culminating in the formation of the Socialist Workers Party in 1938. Throughout the years, 1928 to 38, Cannon and the American Trotskyist movement were a red thread of continuity linking the epoch of class struggle politics associated with the Bolshevik creation of the Soviet Workers' Republic in 1917 and the struggles of a beleaguered working class within the United States. Cannon understood that building a revolutionary class struggle party was the vital task necessary to the realization of socialism. As outlined in the second volume of Bryan Palmer's study of Cannon's life, James P. Cannon and the Emergence of Trotskyism in the United States, 28 to 38. Cannon's history and political practice during the years of the Great Depression are rich with lessons for everyone committed to the socialist transformation of society today. Bryan Palmer is an historian of labor and the left. He has authored, co-authored, and edited more than 25 volumes, including a 3-volume history of colonialism and capitalism in Canada from 1500 to the present, and a number of works on Canadian working class history, including Working Class Experience, the Rethinking the History of Canadian Labor, 1800 to 1991. He did this in 92. And co-authored Toronto's Poor, a Rebellious History in 2016. His writings on American Trotskyism includes James P. Cannon and the Origins of the American Revolutionary Left, 1890 to 28 in 2007. Revolutionary Teamsters, the Minneapolis trucker strike of 1943. He did this in 2013. And James P. Cannon and the Emergence of American Trotskyism, 28 to 38 in 2021. His writings have been translated into French, Portuguese, Spanish, Korean, Greek, Turkish, and Chinese. After teaching at Queen's, Simon Fraser, and Trent, where he was a Canada Research Chair, he retired in 2018. His most recent book, forthcoming with Verso, is a study of the Marxist public intellectual Mike Davis. So please give a warm welcome to Professor Bryan Palmer.
Well, thanks very much, Elizabeth and Barry and others who organized this. It's my honor to be here, and I'm always happy to talk about canon. I'll speak. I don't even know if I'll speak entirely for 40 minutes, but I'm going to restrict my comments somewhat. I'm going to start, however, with just a very brief kind of indication of how I got into the canon study, which began. It's a long time ago in the mid 1990s. So I've been at this the better part of 30 years. Seems a long time. And it's a rich history. And it was written really because, as a historian of labor in the left in Canada, and as my own politics consolidated in the Trotskyist tradition, I was looking very much to, to a subject that could address for our times the lessons of the revolutionary left and its making. And Cannon seemed an ideal subject. He was a red thread of continuity that linked what I think is the best in the radical American working class traditions. He was an agitator with the industrial workers of the world. He learned from that experience the necessity of co-joining the politics of class struggle at the point of production with a political orientation towards the state and an anti-capitalist and the necessity of anti-capitalist transformation, something that dawned on him decidedly with the Bolshevik victory in 1917 and the dilemma posed for socialists during World War I. He was a founding member of the Communist Party. He's largely been excised out of that history by the official kind of Stalinist airbrushing of dissidents out of the movement. But he did chair the actual founding meeting of the Communist Party, the Workers' Party in the United States in 1921, and he was an architect really in the communist movement in those very early years of creating rather than an underground clandestine communist movement of foreign-born workers out of touch with American reality. He struggled to bring a connection between the foreign-born and the native-born American working class, and to make the struggle for communism an open public mass movement. He led what was arguably the Communist Party's most successful mass organization, the International Labor Defense Organization, which struggled to defend class war prisoners of all kinds, but among them victims of repression such as Sacco and Vanzetti. He was won over to Trotskyism late in the 1920s, along with a Canadian ally, Morris Spector, and smuggled out of Russia in 1928 some founding documents of the left opposition, penned by Trotsky in opposition to Stalin's turn towards socialism in one country. He was promptly expelled from the Communist Party, and in 1928 began the project of really starting anew to create a new movement that would reorient the Communist International back to its origins as a movement as a global movement struggling for world revolution. And in this, he fought a very uphill battle over the course of the 1930s, but one that was, I think, very rich in lessons for all of those interested in a revolutionary transformation of society. I'll focus really on three developments, and these developments were, in some senses, great achievements of the Trotskyist movement. The movement suffered inordinately in the 1930s in terms of its isolation, in terms of its being dwarfed by the larger communist and increasingly Stalinized movement associated with Moscow, which had a great impact in the 1930s and which drew many fellow travelers, liberal-oriented but concerned about social justice issues, to its banner. Cannon and those in the Trotskyist movement were constantly assailed by the Stalinist forces. When their movement was initiated, they faced violent attacks at their meetings and forums, which were invaded by often knife-wielding or bat-holding elements from the Communist Party, directed to do so by their leadership. Many suffered beatings. Many a meeting was broken up. Cannon himself mobilized old allies from the industrial workers of the world in defense guards to protect their meetings and to allow them the rights of workers' democracy and freedoms of speech, which were fundamental to the socialist movement, and which the Communist Party was actually playing a role in undermining in this period. But the difficulties of a small, struggling group, no more than 100 people, eventually by the early 30s, rallied to Cannon's banner. A small group fighting the uphill fight against capitalism, the state, and an entrenched grouping associated with the Comintern. Made life incredibly difficult for Cannon and for others, and he had some very difficult years. But he began to come out of those difficulties, and the Trotskyist movement began to exercise an impact in 1934, when the Trotskyists in Minneapolis, led by the Dunn brothers, Vincent Ray Dunn, Miles Dunn, and Grant Dunn, and who drew to their ranks people like Farrell Dobbs, and who had older connections to, again, IWW figures who became Trotskyists, like Carl Skoglund, an immigrant Swedish worker. A very small group of Trotskyists in Minneapolis had a protracted sense of how to transform the craft unionism, so-called, of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which was a very conservative union, led by a figure named Dan Tobin, who was somewhat notorious for opposing industrial unionism and arguing that to bring all workers into the labor movement would really throw nothing but rubbish at labor's door. What the Minneapolis Teamsters did was build through a series of 3 strikes in 1934, a rather ossified union, a business union associated with the American Federation of Labor and concerned almost entirely with wages and sectional, localized, particular issues. They turned that into a fighting force that by the end of 1934 had grown to over 7,000 members. They fought 3 strikes, and they fought strikes in a way that I think exemplified the class struggle program of the Trotskyists, which was dedicated to winning advances for the working class, but in a principled way, not hiding defeats, not overreaching, but always operating in a principled way, and in bringing the workers closer and closer through an arduous process of education and dedicated struggle against class enemies, to understand the barriers that they had to overcome if they were, in fact, to win not just the wage issue, but to win a wider transformation of society. Those strikes were part of a 1934 revival of class struggle that came out of the depths of the Depression. and 3 strikes, all led by revolutionary organizations, sort of galvanized the politics of class in 1934. The Trotskyists in Minneapolis organizing Teamsters, A.J. Muste and the American Workers Party organizing auto parts workers in Toledo, and Harry Bridges and the Communist Party organizing longshore workers in San Francisco. Now, those 3 strikes are all important, and they indicated that the upheaval and the sort of revival of class struggle that would take place in the course of the later 1930s was being led by revolutionaries outside of the mainstream of the American trade union movement. And they showed the way towards the mass upheavals associated with the sit-down strikes and the organization of industrial workers in auto, steel, and other sectors in 1937. Somebody like John L. Lewis, a mainstream trade unionist and in fact a notorious anti-communist in the late 1920s, he saw blood flow in the streets in Minneapolis in 1934, and he saw this as a harbinger of what was to come, and it inspired him to actually break out of the confines of the AFL and to help build the Congress of Industrial Organizations, to extend the parameters of trade unionism into the unskilled and semi-skilled operatives in the factories and mass production industries. The Teamsters strike in Minneapolis in 1934, which was led by local workers affiliated with the Trotskyist movement in the coal yards and in other sectors of the trucking industry, was nonetheless orchestrated and developed also by Cannon and other leaders within the developing Trotskyist movement, the group that had left the Communist Party, still at that time considering itself really an external faction of the Comintern, trying to induce the Comintern to get back to its origins and get back to its revolutionary politics. The Communist Party opposed almost virtually every action of the Teamsters in Minneapolis. They pushed a very third period sectarian line, which was adventurist, and criticized the Trotskyists for not attacking state power directly. But what the Trotskyists did was they gathered under their fold, really, and under their leadership, the mass of workers in Minneapolis, to the point that Minneapolis, once known as an open shop town, a bastion of non-union employer association dominated politics, they moved it into the ranks of one of the leading union towns in the United States. Their discipline, they set up an immensely successful strike headquarters. They organized a women's auxiliary to support the strike. They organized the unemployed and brought them in line with support for the strike. And they fought not only local employers who were as recalcitrant and resistant to class organization as any in the United States. They fought them. They fought local police and officials. They fought a farmer labor government led by a farmer labor figure named Olson. They fought him as well because he was engaged in a kind of reformist balancing act in which, on the one hand, he would speak out of one side of his mouth as a workers' representative, and on the other, order the National Guard in to protect property and support the bosses in their resistance to the strikers. At the end of the day, in 1934, after establishing a workers' newspaper to counter the bosses and property interest lies during the strike, after creating this incredibly a network of public speakers, after battling in the streets and the market districts, in which, in the first battle, 2 figures associated with the employers' associations died as a consequence of confrontations. In another battle where the police shot to kill, 2 strikers were killed. Those strikers are still remembered with plaques in the Market District in Minneapolis, and there's an annual remembrance of those who fell in the cause of making Minneapolis a Union town. Trotskyists thus were led, and I would argue, the most successful of the class strikes and upheavals of 1934. They won decisively, whereas other battles in Toledo and in San Francisco were more mixed in their victories, as marked as they were. From that, and Cannon played a decisive role from outside the Union, but in terms of his appreciation of how to lead a mass struggle, which he learned in the IWW, of how to speak truth to workers in the midst of struggle, of how to educate them in both the sort of everyday politics of sort of a realistic assessment of what the confrontation entailed. He put, in some senses, he and the Minneapolis Teamsters helped to put Trotskyism on the map in terms of the class struggles that were ongoing in the United States. And that led the way to what I think is a second major issue of Cannon's work in the 1930s, which was the fusions and entryism that allowed Trotskyism to broaden its base, to win new recruits out of other developments which were ongoing because of the downturn of the 1930s. The Toledo strikes, led by A.J. Muste's American Workers Party, and the Minneapolis strikes, led by Trotskyists in the Teamsters, brought the American Workers Party and the Communist League of America, the Trotskyist organization, together, and resulted in a fusion. Now, it was not easy sailing. There were differences among these groups that had to be ironed out, but Cannon and his ally in the Communist League of America, Max Shachtman, were both adamant that Trotsky's orientation, called the French turn, the need to sort of branch out and extend the reach of Trotskyism into other larger organizations where youth and militant workers were being drawn into during the Great Depression. This resonated well with Cannon and Shachtman. It caused a split. Which would manifest itself later when the Trotskyists and fused with the Musteites entered the Socialist Party. But a figure like Hugo Oehler, who had been a key ally and a majorly important organizer in the Communist Party in the late 1920s, and worked with Cannon to help form the Communist League of America. Oehler had a far more kind of sectarian approach and ended up splitting ultimately from Cannon. A great loss, really, to the revolutionary movement, but one that indicated that sometimes it is necessary to take stands that actually, draw very good people out of the movement that they should be associated with. Now, when the Musteites in the American Workers Party and the Cannonists in the Communist League of America fused, they formed the Workers' Party. And shortly thereafter, Cannon and Muste worked very well together in terms of cross-country speaking engagements and strike actions. And there was then a move to go into the Socialist Party and to follow Trotsky's admonition in the French turn of the need to sort of penetrate and work within and win to your politics those who were being won over to the Socialist Party, which had much less overtly revolutionary politics. That party in the United States was led by Norman Thomas, and it was actually by the time in the mid 30s that the Workers' Party, led by Cannon and Muste, made its entry into the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party was really, in some senses, on the skids. It could not command the electoral support that it had as early as 1932. It was losing electoral support. It was, in some senses, operating in the shadows in the unemployed movement and in other movements of industrial organization, in the shadows of the Communist Party, which was having perhaps more of an impact. And the debate over how to enter into the Socialist Party really, in some senses, divided the Trotskyists. They were forced, when they entered, to undergo some humiliating, in some senses, supplications to the leadership of the Socialist Party, which was itself divided into left and right and more centrist elements. But the Socialist Party, for instance, which had always allowed various factions and groups to have their own publications, dictated that the Workers' Party could not have its own publication. It was denied the right to publish its views in ways that had been quite common and normal in the socialist movement. And none of the major figures in the socialist that entered the Socialist Party as part of the Workers' Party, and a faction of a grouping of which was aligned very directly with Cannon, were ever granted any major organizational or institutional positions or posts. And this French turn, which, by the way, had not been terribly successful and did not work out terribly well in France, didn't have any firm guideposts. So Cannon, as the leading figure among the very overtly Trotskyist-oriented group in the Workers' Party, had to really play it by ear. And in doing so, he soon became, in some senses, alienated and stood very much alone from a lot of his own close allies, like Shachtman, someone who came in via the fusion with the Musteates, James Burnham, who was playing a significant role at that time. Shachtman and Burnham thought that the way to develop an entry was to work through the top echelons of what they considered the left-wing leadership within the Socialist Party. And so they oriented towards them, and they concentrated their work in New York City. Cannon said, this is the wrong way to proceed. The real way to proceed is to work among the masses that are being drawn to the Socialist Party, to build the Socialist Party, but to build it in ways that accented the revolutionary politics of the Trotskyists rather than the more tepid orientation of the different layers of leadership of the Socialist Party. And what Cannon did was he took to the road, and he led a series of agitational meetings and speeches, and he ended up traveling across the country and settling in California, where he and another figure that he recruited out of the socialist ranks, Glenn Trimble, came very close to taking over the leadership of the California Party, and started at what was one of the most effective mass struggle newspapers, agitational newspapers of that era, called Labor Action. And Cannon, plumped on the hustings for Norman Thomas and his election in 1936, and he worked to build the Socialist Party, and came very close, as I said, to actually becoming a leading figure in the California Party. Now, as he was doing this, of course, the more conservative elements in the Socialist Party leadership began to see the problem of Cannon's presence and of the Trotskyist presence, and particularly around differing positions around the Spanish Civil War, around differing positions around a committee for the defense of Leon Trotsky that I'll talk about when I conclude in a couple of minutes. And in a variety of other areas, the Socialist Party leadership moved very decisively against Cannon and all the Trotskyists. Up to this point, Shachtman and Burnham still thought that the Socialist Party and that they had entered could be won over to revolutionary politics, that they could take it over. Cannon and Trotsky said, no, that is not going to happen. We will inevitably be expelled. We will inevitably be driven out. But what we need to do is function within the party as left-wing revolutionary militants, show workers, show young students and radicals, show those who are being honestly drawn to the Socialist Party on the grounds that they thought it was a fighting force for socialism, what actual revolutionaries can and will do, and to prove to them that we are, in fact, the sort of beacon of the future. And that's what Cannon did until the Socialist Party began a series of very undemocratic. And remember, the Socialist Party of Norman Thomas had always proclaimed itself to be an inclusive party. The inclusion stopped at a certain point. And in the end, Cannon and the rest of the Trotskyists were largely removed, expelled, driven out. And that's when they moved to form the Socialist Workers Party in 1938, which would go on to be the leading section of the establishment of the Trotskyist Fourth International internationally. Now, one of the areas that, and I think a major part of my book, and one of the pieces that I'm most proud of, is in dispelling the notion so common among commentators on the Trotskyist entry into the Socialist Party, that the Trotskyists were determined to split and wreck the Socialist Party. Now, in some ways, this view was given some credence by statements made both by Cannon and Trotsky that one positive effect of the entry was, in fact, the demise of the Socialist Party and the clearing of the slate of what they considered to be objectively an enemy of class struggle politics and a revolutionary possibility. They said that retrospectively, but the purpose had never been to go in and split and wreck. The splitters and wreckers, in fact, were the Socialist Party leadership. What Cannon and company did was work to build the Socialist Party and promote revolutionary politics. And when that became obvious to the leadership of the Socialist Party, they had to be gotten rid of. So the notion that and this comes from all kinds of comments of those who saw the downward slide of the Socialist Party and thought it should be attributed to Trotskyists and the entry that they made and the splits that then occurred. In fact, the Socialist Party, as I indicated at the beginning, was on a downward slide throughout the 1930s. It continued on that downward slide. Its failure to develop an approach to World War II continued that downward slide to the point that it became increasingly irrelevant in class struggle politics in the United States. But it was not because of any destructiveness of the Trotskyists, but rather of their own sort of programmatic vacillations and inability to develop a revolutionary perspective. Now, one of the areas where the Socialist Party leadership and the Trotskyist group differed greatly was around the formation, which the Trotskyists promoted, of the American Committee for the Defense of Leon Trotsky, which led to the hearings in Mexico, where Trotsky defended himself from the slanders, lies, and attacks that had been mounted during the purge trials in Moscow, which began in the early 30s and really gathered steam in 1936-37, and drew many American liberals who defended Russia into their orbit. People writing for and working with The Nation, for instance, were often very attracted to the Stalinist calumnies against Trotsky ridiculous arguments that he was an agent of Hitler, etc. Anyway, what that and again, this is a long chapter in the second volume of my canon studies. The exemplary work of the Trotskyists in building the committee to defend Leon Trotsky showed was how to work in a united front way with honest liberals who did not share the revolutionary politics of the Trotskyists, but did basically understand that there was something wrong with the way the Moscow Purge trials were going. And this was for American intellectuals on the left, this was a huge divisive issue in the late 1930s. But what Cannon and Shachtman in particular worked very much with the committee, and others like George Novick did, was they built and sustained an impressive mobilization to defend Trotsky, and to actually that resulted in these hearings in Mexico where Trotsky delivered, amazingly detailed speeches and refutations of the claims that were being made in the Moscow trials. And this was really a united front of a wide array of people who again had to confront certainly capitalists, but also elements in the labor movement, and certainly elements associated with the Comintern. Challenge them and swim very much against the tide of left-wing thought to create basically a struggle for truth and justice on an international scale. And in how they handled dealing with many liberals who resented their revolutionary politics, but couldn't stomach the overt lies and falsifications coming out of Moscow, was, I think, an exemplary lesson and series of lessons in how to build mass mobilizations on a united front basis. So those three areas of entryism, united front work, and struggles in the labor movement on the basis of sort of programmatic principles and realistic assessments of what it was possible to win in a non-revolutionary situation are, I think, very much relevant for today's left-wing movements. And I think at that point, in the hopes that there'll be a discussion around these questions where perhaps more pointed issues can be raised, I think I'll bring that to a close. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bryan. Thank you. Okay, so if he's correct, we are going to open up the floor now for a Q&A. So I would just ask anybody that wishes to speak, we'll put up their virtual end, and with the help of Carrie, we'll try to get to as many as you can. Usually what we do is we take 2 or 3 questions from people, and then we go back to Bryan so he can give them some time to answer that. Each person that wishes to ask a question has 3 minutes, and then when I hear 2 or 3, I will go back to Bryan and give him the amount of time that he has to answer it. Okay, so we're going to start with Gary. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, I have kind of two questions. The Voorhees Act in the United States made it illegal to be a member of an international organization, particularly if you're a left wing. So, and Cannon and other leaders of the Socialist Workers Party, I think, were tried under that act, and he spent time in prison. And he used the time to write a whole bunch of letters, which were later published as letters from prison. And I wondered if you might say a few words about that. And the other thing is the Burnham-Shachtman fight, which was called, Cannon and Trotsky referred to as the petty bourgeois opposition, and wrote a book called The Struggle for a Proletarian Party. And Trotsky, I think that was, he wrote In Defense of Marxism. Was that? Yeah. So I wondered if you could say a few words about those two aspects of Cannon's life.
Okay, so I'll move to Barry.
Okay, I was muted there and now I'm back. Thank you, Chair and Bryan. A wonderful exposition of the crucial 10 years that you examined in your book and in your talk this evening. Thank you very much for that. I have two questions related. At the time, the mid to late 1930s was critical for the experience of the revolutionary vanguard in the Spanish Revolution. And it exhibited the fundamental difference between the Popular Front, which was a Stalinist concept, versus the United Front. And I'm wondering if Cannon had much to say about that and work aimed at drawing the lessons of the unfolding situation in Spain, which turned out to be a tragedy. My second question is about how Cannon and his comrades organized to present their ideas in the Socialist Party, USA. You explained, Bryan, that despite the more liberal atmosphere, recognizing the rights of opposition to present their views in various ways, including in print, was eclipsed in the period of the intervention by the Trotskyists in the Socialist Party, where they were told that their publications were not acceptable, were banned, really. So how did they present their ideas in written form and in other ways to overcome these obstacles? Thanks very much.
Okay, so we're going to go back to Bryan and give him 5 minutes to answer these questions.
Okay, for on Gary's point, Cannon, everything that Gary said comes after the period I'm talking about. But it really is a period of repression and constraint during World War II. Now, for instance, Cannon was in fact jailed under the Smith Act for treasonous activity, supposedly, in terms of the positions the Socialist Workers Party was putting forward on World War II. That jailing took place from, I believe, 1944 to 46. The trials the repression started in 41, and the final trials and conviction took place in 1943. With, by the way, the collusion of the Communist Party, which provided states evidence for the trial and conviction of Cannon and 18 other Trotskyists and Minneapolis Teamsters. And the jailing of Cannon and those Minneapolis Teamsters was part of the repression, too, of the Teamsters local in Minneapolis, which had become such a major force in the Midwest trucking sector, and they broke the back of the Trotskyist hold over the General Drivers Union in Minneapolis, and it was a collusion of Dan Tobin and the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Roosevelt's State Department, and local, forces in Minneapolis and elsewhere. The FBI was involved. So and Cannon did write a series of letters from prison, and he played a role in the leadership of the Trotskyists through those letters from prison, but they were censored, and he had to rely on others to step in, which they did. The leadership of Morris Lewitt and others stepped in and took over the direction of the Socialist Workers Party for the time he was in jail. The split that you refer to between Burnham and Shachtman was over a series of questions, but the most pointed was the nature of the Soviet Union, which became an issue at the very start of the Second World War. And Cannon and others held to the position that the Soviet Union was a degenerate worker state. Shachtman and others moved away from that position into third campism, where they saw it as bureaucratic collectivism or some other form of organization, sort of akin to capitalism, but certainly not socialism, and hence a state that did not need to be defended, which Trotsky and Cannon felt that it did need to be defended. And that led to Shachtman's exodus and his formation of a new political organization, and his, over the long term, movement decidedly to the right, to the point that by 1960, he was embracing and supporting the Bay of Pigs invasion of the United States of Cuba. Burnham moved even more to the right and became an advocate of basically very conservative politics, and worked with William F. Buckley, and was eventually awarded a Medal of Honor by Reagan in the 1980s. With Barry's point, yes, absolutely, the Spanish Civil War became a telling point in the differentiation that went on in 1937, which separated out the elements of the Socialist Party leadership, even its so-called left-wing leadership, its militants, and the Trotskyists. And of course, those left-wing militants were aligning with, in the Socialist Party, were aligning with the Communist Party, and did not want criticism of the Communist Party of the kind that Cannon and others were saying was absolutely necessary to avert the tragedy that was unfolding in Spain, where the Communist Party was responsible for, in fact, the sort of armed attacks on and murderous assault on militants in the POUM and among anarchists and Trotskyists who were fighting in the front lines against fascism in Spain. The second point: how did the Trotskyists in the Socialist Party put forward their views? Well, one way they put forward their views was not to start a factional organ like a newspaper, which they were banned from doing, but as Cannon did with Glenn Trimble, who was a left-wing Socialist Party member, but actually to establish an agitational paper like Labor Action on the West Coast. They also spoke incessantly at forums. They organized they were able to organize their own forums on, for instance, the necessity of the defense of Trotsky, on the Spanish Civil War, on labor struggles in particular locales. They were able to where they had particular strength, which they did in places like Chicago, to put forward, to basically defy the ban on publications. They published what in essence was a Trotskyist newspaper out of the Chicago local called the Socialist Appeal. But what all this did was in fact simply fuel the fires of animosity of various layers of leadership in the SP, which, ended up pushing for their expulsion or their disciplining in some way, and blocking of work that the Trotskyists thought needed doing. So, for instance, blocking of the work of organizing for the defense of Leon Trotsky, and aligning with liberal elements like John Dewey, who played a very good role in the Committee for the Defense of Leon Trotsky. So they had all kinds of ways in which they refused the sort of bureaucratic suffocation of their politics and movement, and they certainly didn't succumb to that. And Cannon in particular was especially strong on that front. Shachtman and Burnham in New York City, where they still thought they could align with seemingly left-wing leaderships, were less resolute in that. And it was one area where Trotsky came very much to, Cannon's support and said, Cannon's right and how he's behaving.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Mark K., did I see your hand up for a question? Could you unmute him, Gary?
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Just wanted to say, but I think Brian partly discussed it already. I just wanted to ask, what was Cannon's attitude toward the critique that Russia, that Soviet Union under Stalin was state capitalist? But I know you partly discussed this under the point of being bureaucratic collectivists, because there's still a theory today among some leftists that Russia, the Soviet Union was state capitalist. Can you go further into Cannon's view on this question?
Yeah, well, Cannon really, Elizabeth, should I answer this or have you got
No,
another
I'm
question?
going to another question, if you don't mind, Brian. Okay, Justin B., Seattle, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, not exactly a question, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate Brian's presentation, talking about doing class struggle work in a non-revolutionary situation in order to actually build the revolutionary movement. And I think, yeah, I appreciate the being able to hear that. And yeah, I think, this really sums up what we're trying to do. Well, what we did with Shama Sawant on the Seattle City Council for a decade, and what we're trying to do now with the congressional campaign and building Workers Strike Back. But yeah, I mean, just today, we see historic levels of anger at Trump and the Republicans, but also at the Democratic Party, which is pretty stunning, given that Trump is the one in power and losing popularity with the war in Iran and everything. But yeah, in this context, I think, our campaign is trying to draw together and organize the working class to make a real breakthrough, in a similar way to, Cannon and the Trotskyists making a real breakthrough with the Teamsters strike in Minneapolis that, as I agree with Brian, was a decisive, the decisive victory, compared to even the other really important strikes. But yeah, I think we really need something like that to galvanize working class struggle and organization today. And yeah, what we've been saying is, we have a real shot to elect the first ever revolutionary socialist to Congress. And of course, it's an uphill battle, but we've now raised over $500,000 with 4 months left before the primary election. And yeah, I think it would be a political earthquake if we were to win this. So yeah, just hope people are following it. And yeah, thanks so much for the invite to this meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Joshua, and then we'll go back to Brian. Joshua?
Hey, hello, I'm Josh. I'm part of the, younger, more progressive leftists. And just listening to your presentation, I just kind of wanted to just kind of understand some of the arguments I've heard against Trotskyism and why, it's kind of seen as like a taboo kind of infighting. So from a lot of the people I do listen to and I've also read up on, they kind of view Trotsky as, like I said, leftist infighting. And also, in terms of the theories that I've been reading up on against with Trotsky, when it comes to the permanent revolution and the two-stage theory, based on, I mean, I'm just wondering, like, is there any credence to the permanent revolution, especially applying it to modern day, like how things are today. I'm not sure if that question makes sense, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. I'm going to go back to Bryan now to answer any or all, and he has
Okay,
5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah, Mark's question it was on bureaucratic collective. It was on bureaucratic collectivism, was it not?
State capitalism.
Sorry, it was.
State capitalism.
Oh, is it state capitalism? Yeah, yeah. I think that both Cannon and certainly Trotsky defended the gains of October in terms of the revolution of 1917 and the establishment of collectivized property forms, which, in spite of the Stalinist counter-revolution and the degeneration of the political degeneration of the revolution, that remained, and that was a fundamentally advance for humanity that needed to be defended. So it was always Trotsky's view up until the moment that he died, and Cannon's for the rest of his life, that those gains had to be, defended. And I think the telling point there is that, if those gains had been obliterated and they didn't need defending, then what happened at the close of towards the end of the 20th century? When the final counter revolution in Russia, which has brought Putin to power, surely that obliterated, in some senses, many of the gains of the Soviet Revolution. But it took a long time for that obliteration to take place, and many, many years of imperialist encirclement and containment. So in my view, Cannon and Trotsky were right to offer critical defense to the Soviet Union, which they knew had many, many problems, which needed a political revolution inside the Soviet Union to overcome. But the fact that the property forms had not established capitalist social relations definitively, that was what needed defending. Now I'm having trouble remembering the other questions. Was it Justin or from
Joshua? Or maybe
Joshua?
Justin too.
Joshua from
Yeah.
Seattle, who raised the question of struggles in non-revolutionary times, and I think that is fundamental, because too often the far left and Stalinists in as an expression of that to some extent saw in the third period of the early 1930s was a reflection of this, saw the revolution around the corner. Cannon and the Trotskyists never succumbed to that kind of illusion. They knew that the struggles were for immediate gains for workers, but when you struggled for those immediate gains in a principled way, you did not have to basically present to workers a false sense of what that meant. You could struggle to win gains for the working class, which were of fundamental importance, and then in a more protracted and sort of sober way, develop a class consciousness among workers that would actually bear fruit in situations in the future. And we exist in defiantly non-revolutionary times, obviously. But what the Minneapolis Teamsters and revealed was, when they had a protracted view of that struggle, those Teamsters were organizing and conceiving of ways to develop mass production unionism among the truckers. In 1928, they were thinking of this, and it took them years. And then an opening broke in 1934, and they were there to exploit that opening and to advance the cause of the workers. In terms of the whole question of Trotskyism and infighting, well, I think, what Cannon's uphill battle against Stalinism over the course of the 1930s revealed is that you cannot actually forego principled questions and obfuscate fundamental truths on the revolutionary left and hope to win workers over the sustained long haul. You have to be able to call a defeat. You have to be able to struggle for victories in a realistic way. You have to have a program that calls for capitalist transformation. And you cannot put forward, a kind of zigzagging program like the Communist Party did from the 1928 into the 1940s of, revolutionary red unionism now, popular frontist class collaboration and activity later, ignoring in some senses, the dire threat that fascism posed in the early 1930s and saying, as the communists did, first Hitler, then us, because it was first Hitler and then the Communist Party was basically obliterated along with the entirety of the left. So there are principled fights that have to be fought and that are difficult. It doesn't mean you have to be sectarian, and it doesn't mean you have to engage in ugly, nasty, name calling, but you can put forward, and it is the obligation of revolutionaries to put forward a politics of differentiation that separate out revolutionaries from a mass of liberal, reformist, and conservative, and to bring forward also, which is fundamental in our time, the decisive role of class struggle in the transformation of society. Too often we've lost sight of that in the current moment, not because other social movements are insignificant, but because other social movements have tended to fight on particularistic rather than generalized foundations.
Okay, thank you. John Wunderlich, did I see your hand up? And I know there's a question in the chat from somebody too, if Carrie could read that, because I don't seem to be able to retrieve it. But first of all, John, Wunderlich, did you have your hand up?
Apparently they're in a location they cannot speak. I could read the question.
Okay. So, but if you have anything in the chat, could you read? Do you have a question or two in the chat, Gary?
Yes, Chair. There's two questions. So the first one from John is, my question is, what was Cannon's relationship / opinion of the Milwaukee Sewer Socialists? That's a question from John.
Excuse me,
Yes.
can you repeat that? I didn't catch it.
Oh, sure. Should I post it? Should I repost it in the chat if it's easier for you?
If you can just post it so I can see it, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Because I'm not sure if
You want me to read it out loud, Curie?
Yes, please.
Okay, Brian, this question is, what was Cannon's relationship or his opinion of the Milwaukee Sewer Socialists, the reformists in Milwaukee who gained office?
Okay, and the second question before we go back to Brian is what?
Yeah, second question from Phyllis is, I hope this is okay to ask a question in the chat. With regard to the unemployed during the 30s and how they were organized by the Communist Party, and with the situation where we see now with regard to unemployed workers, how can we learn from this, and can this be implemented now?
Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, well, Cannon's attitude towards the sort of you want to call it sewer socialism, some call it gas and water socialism, basically a very moderate socialism that, that had a significant impact in places like Milwaukee, and that has been revived by some in the current moment as an answer. Cannon's attitude towards this was, I think, that it was partial, incomplete, and would never really address the fundamental exploitative nature of capitalism. That you could reform, for instance, the delivery of fundamental services to working class people, and that would be a positive achievement. But it wasn't going to change the dynamic of capitalist social relations and the exploitative character of capitalism as an economic system. It wasn't going to change the relations of workers, of capital and labor. It wasn't going to resolve the many special oppressions that flowed in the wake of that as well. So he would have been, I think, he would have seen this as insufficient and would have seen, he was a revolutionary who thought that you needed a root and branch transformation of the social order, and not basically a sort of reformist, massaging around the edges of society's issues. And the next question was about, remind me, Elizabeth, what was the second one?
I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Carrie, could you say that again? Because I can't pick it up in my chat for some reason here.
Oh, sure, no problem. With regard to the unemployed during the 30s.
Oh, the unemployed. Sure, I've got that.
Okay.
That's right. Well, I think it's fundamental to organize the unemployed, but the way the Trotskyists did it in Minneapolis was very different than the way it had been approached by many other groups. They organized the unemployed in tandem with their organization of the employed. They saw both groups as fundamental, and they developed a strategy of organizing a municipal workers union that was composed of unemployed workers, and they rallied them to support the strike action of the truckers in 1934, and this astounded people in Roosevelt's New Deal administration, who said, "Look, these people should be, wanting to take the jobs of these people, not, marching in support of them." And what it was about, what the Trotskyists did was they used their daily newspaper, which they put out in the midst of the strike, to, address the unemployed, to appeal to them. And they developed an understanding of class solidarity, be their wages high or low, be their place in the wage system, employed, unemployed, casually employed, employed, in an inadequate or insufficient way. So it was really an attempt to organize and educate and bring into the ranks of the revolutionary movement the employed worker and the unemployed worker, on the foundation that an injury to one truly was an injury to all. And yes, I think this is absolutely vital today. But it requires, it requires those in revolutionary organizations outside of the trade union movement to do this, because the labor movement is concerned with organizing workers around the wage package and condition issues. It has limitations in that sense. Those outside of the trade union movement can be that are linked to and embedded in the trade unions as well, have the capacity, I think, to link the various sectors of the working class into a class struggle, program that unites sectors of the working class so often divided and separated from one another.
Yes, thank you. So, Kashama, and then I have a second question from Joshua.
Thank you for an opportunity to say a few things. And first of all, thanks so much to Bryan for a really, really fantastic presentation. It's really, really useful and educational. A couple of points that I wanted to add to the discussion, and it'll be great if Bryan wants to comment on it. One is, it's not so much questions, but sort of observations based on the work we've been doing, and Justin spoke a little bit about this. One is that the question of splits, I mean, a lot of the people who join revolutionary organizations, it is especially hard when splits happen, and of course the first couple hit you really hard, but after having spent 15 to 18 years in revolutionary organizations here in the United States, my conclusions are that really what happens is that the task of going up against the forces of capitalism is so demanding in terms of, the bar is set so high in terms of what really constitutes being principled. Bryan has said many times about, that Cannon and his fellow Trotskyists took a very principled approach, but concretely taking that principled approach, in my view, is so hard. Not that in a bad way. I just mean that the bar is set so high that a lot of people, even well-intentioned people, crumble in the face of it. And that starts becoming the reason why splits end up happening. That is certainly the experience we've had, where those of us, my fellow revolutionary socialists and I, we have consistently fought for a principled approach. That doesn't mean we didn't make mistakes. The point is that that was our quest. And because of that, there were a lot of disagreements off and on in the leadership of the organizations that I've been in, including Socialist Alternative, which we left in 2024, which was a major split that we had. That when those disagreements happen, our task is to remain principled and not to be lamenting the splits, in the sense that ultimately our allegiance as Trotskyists, our undying allegiance has to be to the interests of the working class, at any rate, our best estimation of what's in the interest of the working class, and not to an organizational form. And to the extent that the organization that we are part of is in line with what we think is in the interest of the working class, it works. But when it stops working, so in other words, my conclusion is that it's obviously, we have to try extremely hard to keep the revolutionary organization united, but it's with the aim of standing up for the working class and furthering the revolutionary work, not as keeping the revolutionary organization as an end in itself. And then the other thing I've been thinking a lot about is reformism versus revolutionary politics. I think that even historically, winning substantive shifts under capitalism, like the New Deal, that was clearly it was the 1934 strike led by Trotskyists was the crucial component of what made the New Deal happen. Is that even historically we see that winning substantive shifts under capitalism, substantive reforms under capitalism requires militants at the very least. And in reality, every time you sort of scratch under the surface, historically, you find Trotskyists, Marxists who played a crucial role there. And I would say that is even more so true today, with capitalism being in a long-term crisis, because the fact is that the representatives of capitalism are, if anything, even more determinedly adamant not to give in to even minor reforms, minor shifts. The national minimum wage in the US is still $7.25. And what we won in Seattle, in the large scheme of things, are not earth-shattering, but they are earth-shattering in that it took a Trotskyist type of fight back in order to win them, because that's what it took to force the forces of the bourgeois to give in. And so, just in conclusion, I would say that it's true that the labor leadership, the business unionist labor leadership, which is almost entirely what we have in the United States, it only emphasizes the parochial interests of their specific union, the wages, whatever, so much so that they literally sometimes, the worst union leaderships like the construction union or the Teamsters, they end up crossing each other's picket line which is such a disastrous approach. But what I'm trying to say is that that's true. However, even in the fight for the specific parochial interests of wages and benefits, even there, actually, most of the labor leadership, business unionist labor leadership in the United States is completely failing. And that is why actually there's a lot of anger. It's obviously the political questions, the war, ICE terror, all of that. But even the specific questions of the economic needs of the meager section of the working class that is in unions, that is also actually radicalizing them, because they see the business unionist leadership not actually winning. And so I think one of the things we have talked about is how revolutionaries really make the best fighters for and winners of reforms, certainly if we're talking about far-reaching reforms.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to Bryan and let him respond, and then I'm going to go back to Joshua and Jeff. Go ahead,
Well,
Bryan.
I certainly agree with that, and I think that I think that the issue that is being raised there really is that there is no task now more important, I think, than a regroupment of the revolutionary left. We do not the capitalism has been in constant crisis for decades, but capitalism itself is not in crisis. It's riding roughshod over humanity in all kinds of ways, tragically. And one of the tragedies is that it has been given a relatively free rein because the revolutionary left has been basically undermined to the point of almost obliteration. And yet there are groups around, and there is an appetite among young workers and among young people in general for I think for a politics of revolutionary transformation. But the organization, that's what's lacking. That's what's lacking in terms of the direction of protests, which have been episodic and often spontaneous around the generation of sort of outrageous assaults and the transformation really of bourgeois politics into a caricature of what most of us would have perceived it to have been decades ago, a very ugly caricature. So the difficulty of struggling, I'm not understating that, but the revolutionary left needs to be regrouped, and it does need to kind of revive, and I think there's an appetite for that, but there's also all kinds of barriers, including those on the left, that are prohibiting that. And it isn't necessarily about infighting. I think that principled positions could be put forward that could regroup the revolutionary left, while secondary issues of concern might be put aside for a series of discussions. But that will involve then united front work in the old Leninist understanding of what united fronts were and could be and have been. But I think that's the task of the current moment. We are not going anywhere unless the labor movement is rebuilt, and that is never going to happen unless the left is rebuilt, because the labor movement's strengths and advances were always registered when the left was a presence, and the left is simply not the presence that it needs to be at the current moment. So I'm entirely in line with what Vishwama was saying earlier.
Okay, thank you, Bryan. So we have time for the two speakers that got their hands up now, and maybe one more question if somebody wants to put up their hand now. And then we're going to call it the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go to Joshua and then to Jeff. Joshua?
Okay. So just to examine the previous point that was made. So I've just been doing a little bit of more reading about the Trotsky Marxist-Lenin ML split, and just trying to focus it on what's happening in Gaza. And right now we're kind of seeing the closest thing to revolutionary class struggle in Gaza in my lifetime. And, the Palestinian workers, farmers, resistance fighters, they're not asking the question whether this is a permanent revolution or a two-stage revolution. They're fighting for their lives against the most powerful military on earth. And so here's my problem is when I look at so this is primarily based on just the discourse I've seen towards younger leftists and stuff. When it comes to infighting again, when Trotskyist calls Marxist-Leninists tankies or Stalinist traitors, and Marxist-Leninists call Trotskyists sectarian splitters, it feels like we're doing more of the work of the enemy. And, we're just too comfortable in the West. We have food, we have everything we need not to just to survive. And things are just too comfortable for us. So my question is, in a moment where real class solidarity means defending Gaza against imperialism, including supporting Hamas, does all this infighting, seem to be unproductive and maybe counter-revolutionary? And yeah, I just want to get your opinion on that.
Okay, Jeff.
Well, first, thanks so much, Bryan. For the newcomers here, your talk very much parallels Cannon's work, Cannon's books, and I'm looking forward to reading your new books on the same subject, but you presented Cannon's ideas extremely accurately. Before the meeting today started, Barry asked how our tour went, that is the tour of Kashama and me. We toured 6 cities in the Bay Area, and we spoke to close to 350 people about the relevance of revolutionary socialism. And you might not be surprised to learn that we both said pretty much the same thing to receptive audiences across the Bay Area in 6 cities. Well, that was a very promising development. My opinion is that we live in contradictory times, that capitalism is in crisis. It's not so much that Trump is a moron or an idiot and so on. It's that he is a reflection of a capitalist system, U.S. and capitalism in particular, that is in great crisis. Their rates of profit are constantly falling. They have ever increasing competition from other capitalist states like imperialist states like Russia, and that they have to resort to extraordinary, monstrous things like war budgets and granting through the stock market and other mechanisms, the ruling class, unbelievable amounts of money that they can't make in the regular economy because they've offshored huge sections of the American working class. Kashama pointed out, and I agree, that the American public opinion is distinctively anti-capitalist. They have very little confidence in the Democratic and Republican parties. The contradiction we have, as you said, is that the left, in my life experience, is at the lowest point of American history. So you have an angry working class on the one hand, and a minuscule left that is divided, demoralized, if not worse, looking for a lesser evil in the Democratic Party to save them from the monster Trump. That's our biggest contradiction. But I think we're heading towards a period of change. The trade union movement in the late 30s and in the 40s was 50% of the working class. Today, the industrial working class is less than 6%. It's the lowest point in the modern era. So the unions have to be rebuilt from the ground floor up, which is a huge task on the one hand, but it is also a blessing perhaps in disguise in that the vast numbers of the working class are not dominated by totally bureaucratized unions, the latter barely exists in the United States, and the politics of the bureaucracy is worse than we've ever seen. So first, thanks for reminding us of the relevance of canon. Thanks for staying alive long enough to be part of this discussion and reminding young people and all of us that canon's contribution is essential today, that canon's assessment of the class struggle remains ours. And I hope you're well and prosperous.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well,
so I'm going to go to Bryan for the last word of the evening. Go ahead.
yeah, thank you,
Bryan.
Jeff. That's kind of you, and I'm glad to be here discussing this with people of all kinds. I would say, please read the books because of the books I've done on canon, because they are far more coherent and far more precise and far more explicit on all these questions than I could ever be in a kind of off the cuff conversation like this. To Joshua's point, in terms of Gaza, certainly I agree absolutely that, what revolutionaries must do is oppose, obviously, the genocide and to resist, American and imperialism and, its Israeli, the state of Israel's participation in this, obviously, as well, which is critical. Maybe I'm just so far out of things now, but I don't see a lot of this sectarian attack of Trotskyists and Stalinists and Maoists, operative in the current moment. I think you would see a generalized, unity around opposition to American imperialism. I mean, there is, of course, an antagonistic element on the right, which is equated, any critique of Israel and any, assault on American imperialism as anti-Semitic, and I think we can agree that, that has really become a pernicious and ugly element in the, in the arsenal of the ideological moment. But that said, I mean, I lived through moments when, yes, there was assaults on Trotskyist splitters and wreckers and attacks and attacks on Stalinists. But Stalinism is pretty much a spent force, pardon me. And I don't see this as the main issue of that there is this sectarian ideological ill will there, in part because, as Jeff pointed out, and as I agree, the left is has been in such retreat over the last decades. And that's why I say there needs to be a kind of regroupment of the revolutionary left. But it isn't going to happen without some hard analysis and airing of differences that perhaps can then, bridge divides that have existed in the past. But that work is not going to go away. But I don't see the main problem, really, to be blunt. I don't see the main problem in the, in the opposition to the genocide going on in Gaza and the current, critique of imperialism to be, some 1973 antagonism between, Maoist versus Stalinist versus Trotskyist groups. Those groups are largely insignificant at the current moment. And some of them are just not on the radar screen of the, and I guess the point is that I've been trying to push the necessity of coming to grips with principal differences on the left. And I'm not sure where your position is coming from in that. Is that any attempt to come to, to understand and to overcome principal differences on the left is necessarily kind of hair-splitting, counter-revolutionary sectarianism? I mean, I can't buy that. In my experience on the left, it has often been the case that the most sectarian of people are those who proclaim themselves non-sectarian. I'll end on that note.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bryan. And I did say earlier that this was the end, but I don't like to leave anybody behind. I see Sam has put his hand up. So you have 2 minutes if you want to make an intervention, Sam. So go for it.
Do you have a voice, Elizabeth?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you, Bryan, for the information talk about Trotskyism and Stalinism. If Trotsky was in power instead of Stalin, of course, maybe, but I don't know how long he would take it. Anyway, of course, if of history, which is not principally correct. Anyway, now to turn back to Iran, that you 24 hours seeing the CNN and TV. I have a double heart here. Of course, we are anti-war. Did you see New York? Did you see Washington? Millions of people against anti-war. No, because if you stop the war right now, it would be an evil scar, and they would be double wild on Iran. The Iranians, these people, Iranian regime, 3 months ago, they literally went to the street, like literally rifle to their own people. Now, if you leave these monsters like this, I'm not really sure it's even. Of course, yeah, we are hippie. We smoke joint. We drink and we play guitar with my girlfriend. But we are anti-war, right? I have double heart here. That should we really be anti-war? If you leave these people right now, it would be even worse.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Just I wanted to see Brian's view on that about the war topic. That how can we handle this thing as a third voice? How can we handle this? Because if you leave the Iranian regime, they're gonna be more wild on their people. If we stop of course, we all the lefties, we always say stop the war. I don't know. I wanted to see how Bryan think about that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I don't know if you want to respond. It's up to you, Bryan.
Well, I'm not sure I got the entirety of the point. If the question is the war in Iran has to continue to be fought, because if it does not continue to be fought, the situation will be worse. Is that the gist of what the questioner was getting at?
It sounded like it to me.
Well, I think revolutionary leftists have only one position, and that's to call for the defeat of U.S. imperialism at the current moment. That's the stand that must be taken, and then it is for the Iranian people to wage their struggle against the oppressions of their regime. It is not for U.S. imperialism to win a victory for the Iranian people.
Okay, thank you very much, Bryan. In fact, thanks to everyone who participated in making tonight's event, I think, a success. A special thanks to Bryan. And of course, thank you to our technical producer, Carrie, and our political producer, Barry. Socialist Action is celebrating its 32nd anniversary, as I said earlier. And over the next month, SA will host more webcasts, picnics, demonstrations, campaigns, and the launch of a new socialist movement in late May. And on Saturday, May the 2nd in Toronto, Socialist Action will mark International Workers' Day with a concert at the Free Times Cafe. Our spring education conference will take place online on Saturday, June the 13th. And the SA Cross Country Convention will be held on Saturday, June the 20th. For members and for folks who wish to join, please note that Socialist Action Convention will be held in person as well as online, and that's June 20th. For more information about Socialist Action conferences, forums, film nights, and study group held throughout the year, please send us your phone number and email address to us at the Socialist Action website, which is www.socialistaction.ca, or just give us a call at 1-647-986-1917. Once again, thank you all for being with us tonight. Stay safe, stay healthy, and be active. Bye for now.